everyone, how are we doing? I didn't think I was going to be able to get across platforms, but I am across platforms, so it's not just me sat in my bedroom using Facebook like in the old days, because Pete got back in time. Anyway, just going to say it's been a very stressful day today, so if I am less perky, that's why. It's just to do with launching a company and everything associated with it, and the stresses and strains, because I'm not really destined to be an entrepreneur and businesswoman. I just want to run a community and make everybody feel happier. But nevertheless, I am where I am, but it's always good to own at the beginning of a session the way that you're feeling. So if I'm a little bit out of sorts tonight, I apologise. It's just one of those days. But I'm hoping that everybody's feeling all right. Let me know how you're doing. Obviously, we are in a weird situation now where I think a lot of people are starting to venture out for the first time. My own son went to the pub last night, so that was cool. But he said it was very weird because obviously you're not allowed in. You just got to sit outside. But also because it's the first time he's actually been to a pub, because he's now nearly 19 and didn't get to, because pretty much after last November, everything kind of started to slide, didn't it? So people are going out for the first time and having these weird experiences that they haven't had before. And I've done a few trips out, but I'm still not feeling that level of comfort in the world. I don't know how you guys are feeling, but I'm really still feeling like it's quite a foreign environment. And also, I'm quite confused about the messaging because I stay away from the news. I think it's really good for mental health to avoid the news. I don't know whether it's just me, but I genuinely think it's good to just not listen, because most of the time it's either conflicting or inflating and inflaming of fear, and actually it doesn't really drill down into the things and facts and realities that I think we need to know. So I avoid it. But on social media yesterday I kept seeing Boris come out and say that lockdowns had been the reason why things were getting better, and that vaccines weren't the reason that way things are getting better. And I kind of thought, how confusing for everyone, because evidently all the research says that lockdowns are catastrophic on the whole and have had very little impact. And in fact, when you compare it with other countries, it seems that we've done worse because we did lock down. So I think that there's a lot of confusion, isn't there, at the moment? And it doesn't help as well when there's a lot of messaging in the news about particular vaccines that are having problems, because I think that just terrifies people who've had them. Just to let people know, my sister's family have all had the AstraZeneca jab, and I think that there's a lot of kind of contradiction, isn't there? And that's why I think staying away from the news is a good idea, because on the whole, you don't really get to know anything you need to know unless it's something that directly impacts on you. I think we've got so used to living in a world where we're fed so much information that we really don't need or require, that it's affecting our mental health on the daily. And even just that kind of dipping my toe in yesterday instantly kind of causes me a million questions. And I don't know how everybody else is feeling, but certainly for me, it does nothing but add to levels of what I would say is uncertainty, stroke, anxiety. And I did a radio interview before with Mark Dolan on Talk Radio, who I think is great. I love Mark. But we were talking about the fact that there are lots of things that seem to have changed in our society. And one of those, of course, has been things like your neighbours being told that they should inform on you. And there was an interesting thing when we were filling in our census. You know, you have to do the census, which is a lot more dramatically increased than when I remember doing a census. I mean, usually it used to be how many people were in the household. It didn't really have anything about your earnings and so on and so forth. It certainly didn't take an hour. It was like 2 minutes at the door. But for some reason, they seem to be going into great depth with this particular census. But there was a question on it that said, who stayed over at your house on the 21st of March? Now, as it happened, it will have been my son's girlfriend, because my son's girlfriend stayed with us through lockdown, which was a joy. And I hate the fact that she's gone home now. But I think that means that somebody had obviously informed the council of that. And I was talking about the fact that division at the moment and encouraging people to not be community orientated, but to be anti-community orientated. And I think that when I look at the mental health incidence and the rising of that mental health incidence, it's not surprising when the very thing that we require, which is human connection and human capacity for kindness, is being challenged in so many ways. So I just wanted to open today's clinic with that kind of recognition that I think so many of us have got such turmoil, and a lot of us are internalizing that turmoil and believing that there is something wrong with us. But actually, it's not that there's anything wrong with you. It's that you're dealing with, as I've always said, an inhumane experience, something that wasn't meant to happen, shouldn't be being experienced, and that very few of us have got the resources to manage. And I kind of read some of the comments, which I don't tend to do, but on talk radio, and obviously there were the usual ones saying that I'm mad, which we always know, that's always going to be there. But there were some people saying that they loved lockdown, they were wealthier and they were happier than ever before. And I think that brings me back to that tale of two cities, so to speak. On one side, contributory factors of mental health decline being eradicated through furlough, no commute, not having to work, spending time with your family, and maybe finding yourself financially in a much better place, maybe 18 months off that you never dreamt you'd have as a worker. And on the other side, people who are in abject poverty, and people who've had no help, and people who have just found themselves in desperation. And it's not a blame on either side regarding feelings, it's just a recognition that in the UK it does feel like there has been a widening of a gap. And my job, I think, is to try to find a bridge so that we can all connect together again. Because even for me, when I was having that conversation on the radio, I was thinking, it does feel like there is such a high degree of toxicity. And for those of you who are empaths, for those of you who naturally feel people's feelings, it's really easy to swallow a lot of that negativity. And in transcendental work, for those of you interested, one of the things that's really important is to try to bring good energy into the world. So even when bad things are happening around you, instead of kind of going through and joining that negative energy, if you can kind of try to operate at a vibration where you still have gratitude and feel positive for the little things that you can have and give to yourself and to the wider world in a really positive way, the more you alter the vibrations that are negative. I know some people won't get that, but to me, it's like, how can we be the better people in the world? How can we be that change in the world, if that makes sense? Anyway, I digress. I shall get on with the questions. Hi Matt, I understand if you're busy, I can't answer my question. Well, I am doing. I'm 16, struggling the last few months. Mum was an alcoholic, she's drinking every night, inviting all her male friends over. I have two younger siblings, and for their own safety, I have to send them to live with my dad. It's so hard to do, but it's the right decision as Mum's unable to make it. My mum's become violent and blames me for her drinking problem. It's become too much for me that I've tried to end my own life on a few occasions. I love my mum deep down, but I hate the person she's become. I don't know what to do anymore. Should I walk away? I never asked for advice or help. I have no one to turn to, as all my mum's family has disowned her and me also, and I don't know who my dad is. Sorry it's so long. Can you keep this anonymous? Yes, no problem to keep it anonymous. First of all, your safety is paramount amongst everything else. You know, making sure that you get to safety is really, really important. I noticed that you say you sent your two younger siblings to their fathers, so I'm going to make an assumption that that's not the same father. Have you got a relationship with him? Is there any possibility with him understanding what's happening around you, that you could maybe potentially go and stay there? I know that's not an ideal solution, but I'm just talking about imminently at the moment where you're feeling that your mother's getting violent and she's drinking and there's chaos and she's bringing strange men back to the house and those kind of things that do put you in a really precarious situation. Ideally, it would be really good to get you out of that. So one level is there a support network around you anywhere? So it could be friends, it could be distant family members, it could be your mum's friends who are maybe in a more sane position who could offer you somewhere to live just for a temporary period whilst you explore other avenues. Then there is another option. The second option is to actually speak to social services. And that's not to speak to social services to try to get your mum into trouble. It's just that right now you're not in a safe space. And because you're 16, you still come under the Children's Act and your needs and wishes are considered paramount by law. And it also means that they'll be able to look at some accommodation potentially for you where you can live separately to your mother. It doesn't mean you don't have to have a relationship with her, but you can live separately to her. And that might take the form of a care home. It might take the form of independent, semi-independent living, which is kind of more what you get when you're around 16, where they'll have care workers who are on site, but you tend to get like your own little place that you can kind of use and come and go. There are rules and regulations as you'd expect, but particularly when you come from a chaotic place, that can really help. So in Manchester, we have specific housing projects where young people of 16 to 25 are given like a little flat. It's got a lounge, it's got a bathroom, it's got a little kitchen, but also they manage the benefits and they help you out with all of those challenging things that can be really problematic when you've not dealt with them yourself. There's not a lot you can do for your mum at this moment in time. One of the biggest frustrations about addiction and dependency is the person's in a relationship with the dependency, even though it can feel like it's a reflection on you, the fact that she isn't acting in a loving, caring way. And that makes you question your self-worth and your self-value, and it makes you wonder why she can't change for you. It's because she's in the grip of an addictive cycle. She's in a situation where she has a disease, essentially. And whilst you may feel that that makes you throw away, it's not that. It's just you're not in sharp focus because she's constantly anaesthetizing whatever pain it is that's gone on for her, and the addiction cycle is driving her. Now, there are also organisations like Alcoholics Anonymous, which also have family units associated with that. So it might be worth going on the website and having a look at what options there are there. But for me, if you are in a vulnerable situation, I would absolutely speak to social services and just have a really honest conversation with them about the fact that you don't feel safe in your home. And there is another thing that you can do, which might seem really extreme, and I get it, but you can just walk into a police station and you can actually say that you don't have a place to go, and you can put yourself in a circumstance where they have to take care of you. Because on a safeguarding level at 16, you need to be taken care of. So I know that can feel really scary, and it's something that very few people want to do at the moment, but actually it's really effective, because by presenting yourself in that way, they're going to have to make sure that they accommodate you, because it's not safe for you to be left otherwise. So that all options that you could look at. But the main one is, don't see yourself as responsible for healing your mum, because that's not your job. It's her job. And I'm really sorry that you're going through that at an age where you shouldn't be going through that at all. But remember, this is only a tiny portion of your life. And whilst it's a struggle and it's been hard, this doesn't define you. It doesn't define the rest of your life. It's painful now, and there are situations and strategies that need to be employed to make this more bearable. But this is not a reflection of how your life will be. And the more you can get strategy, the more you can get support and solutions, the more, in the long term, you'll be able to go on and have a life where you thrive. So remember that. And before I go on to the next question, also remember the power that you had in protecting your siblings. That's a really big stand to take, to actually make sure that they're safe, to make sure that they have a safe place to go. So just pat yourself on the back for that, because that's a really big deal to actually go out of your way to organise that, and that says something really, really special about you. Hi Emma, thanks for doing these lives. It's an absolute pleasure. I'm reaching out to people in these hard times. I feel bad asking a question, but it might help people too. Do you have any advice for people struggling with meal preparation, eating, drinking enough, exercise and self-care in general when motivation is low? Living alone, and sometimes it's just really hard. So there's a few things. One, I'm obviously going to say Appy Wellbeing, which is my app. You can just look it up on Appy. Download that. There's meal plans that you can plan 7 days of food. You can put in easy and simple. You can put in like times under 20 minutes, you know, just things that take a really short amount of time to prep, and things where you can cook 3 meals that will last 3 days in one batch. You know, there are ways that you can do that. However, if you're really struggling with the motivation, I would look at things, if you can afford it, some of the delivery options can make a really big difference to motivation. So Gusto, for example, And there are some reasonable priced ones, particularly when you're on your own. And they're the ones where they arrive and they're in a box and you basically go through each ingredient, everything's there for you, just pop it in together and you cook a meal for yourself. Now, what's great about it is, even though it might cost you a little bit more, it won't be massively expensive. In fact, single people often say that it's more cost effective because it stops them wasting ingredients. But things like Gusto can make a massive difference because of the fact that it's all there for you. It's a quick prep, like 15 minutes, and you get a nutritious, delicious meal at the end of it. So arguably, that can give you a real kick in the right direction. Obviously, from my point of view, I think it's really important to try to be as non-processed as possible with your food, and definitely try to eat as healthily and nutritionally well as possible, because everything that you put in your body is fuel. And without fuel, or with low grade fuel, you're not going to run as effectively as you should do. So I'd look at those kind of options. And then when it comes down to like breakfast and dinner, because most people just get those box selections for the main meal, I think be really simple about it. So personally, I don't think you can do better than having porridge for breakfast. People can argue with me on that, but I think it is pretty widely acknowledged that porridge in particular is really easy to make. You can soak the oats overnight, which makes them lovely and soft, and you can put them in the microwave with either soya milk or, if you use dairy milk, and you can have a really satisfying breakfast that takes moments to create and that's really healthy and that's really good for you and sustaining, so it sustains your hunger. And then when you get to dinner, hey, listen, beans on toast, again, that has got sugar and salt in it. It does come in a tin, but still is considered a really nutritious meal. So you can kind of arguably look at a really static diet apart from your main meal, but that will give you that kick without too much effort. Because I think when you want to change things, you need to change them incrementally. So that's one of the things I do. Secondly, if you overwhelm yourself with the idea of what exercise you're meant to do, then you just get disenchanted with it all, okay? You disconnect from the process because you're putting yourself into those situations where you're kind of overwhelmed by just thinking about it. Today I woke up and I didn't want to go in the gym. I really didn't want to go in the gym. I wanted to just not do it, but I knew that that meant that I wouldn't feel like I'd achieved very much. So I do something called a Tabata. It's a really good thing called Tabata Timer. It's free to download on the App Store and on the Play Store. And it's basically 20-second intervals with 10 seconds rest. So I just like power out like 10 of those, like doing plank and doing weights. And because they're quite quick, you kind of allow yourself to get into that rhythm without feeling like, oh, what am I going to do next? What's the next exercise? But if you can't manage doing something as simple as a Tabata, even if you just do one, which is just 4 minutes, but again helps to get your body burning, just try and get outside. Just go for a walk. You don't even have to go for a fast walk or a brisk walk. Just go for a walk. Get outside, get that sunlight on your skin. Try to reconnect with the way that you feel around nature. It's been hard. Motivation is the enemy of depression. Motivation is the enemy of lethargy. It really is. But you feel the altar to connect with the one that's required. So a loss of motivation is not just because of you. It's because we've had a year of lockdown lethargy. It has impacted on, apart from those people who have been lucky, and you know, there are a good few million in the UK who have been furloughed and have had a better time. Not everyone. A lot of people get in touch with me on furlough and haven't liked it because, you know, they want to get back into a system of work. But there are quite a lot who've had a really nice time, and for those individuals, it's probably been less problematic to get around and exercise and do all these nice things that kind of are healthy. But for those of you who've had to work, or those of you who've struggled with unemployment, that lockdown lethargy is definitely something that's affected our prefrontal cortex. I've talked about this before, but for those of you who are new to this, that's the area of your brain that's really important for higher functioning. It's what I'm using now to have these conversations. And the problem with that area is when adrenaline and cortisol, the stress hormones, are secreted, it really struggles. And the reason for that is you want instinct to be effective when something stressful occurs, because primordially, as human beings, if we were in a situation where suddenly we had to run away from a wild animal, we're not meant to think about that a great deal. We're meant to just do it. So that flight occurs to get us away from the situation. You're not thinking at the time why you're going away from it. You're not even responding to what's chasing you. You just know that you have to escape. So it kind of suppresses the prefrontal cortex so that the amygdala can take over and get you the hell out of there. Unfortunately, we don't have animals in that way to run away from. So those bursts of adrenaline and cortisol that we're getting because we're watching horrific news or we're being pumped with disgusting images of absolute, in my opinion, indefensible fear icons that have been shoved down our throat to the point where you're either horribly traumatized or totally desensitized. But because of that, your brain's been having this constant kind of hit where your prefrontal cortex is struggling, and it's resulted in a real lethargy. So also know that as we come out of lockdown and you start to socialize again and you start to get back into those habits and you start to see people and reconnect, and your brain starts remembering what it's like to be a true human, not a human that's told what a human's meant to do, even though it goes against every bit of research that we've ever had in the whole area of psychology and physiology and sociology. But as you start reconnecting with that reality, it will get easier. Hi Emma, sorry to bother you. On the 26th, it will be 11 years since my uncle took his own life. Any tips on how to handle grief and trauma also within that? Thank you. So the first thing to say is, I just think that with suicide, you're never really going to get past that origin of impact. And that's not a bad thing. It's one of the things that connects you with the person you've lost. And it also is one of the things that reminds you of how powerful traumatic grief is, because it is different to ordinary grief. So let's give Prince Philip as an example. Prince Philip, the Queen, said death was a miracle. That was the words that she used. It was a miracle. And I completely understood why she felt that, because he was very, very old and definitely was due to die. I can't say it in any other way than that. Of course he was going to die. He was nearly 100 years old. But what was beautiful was that he just fell asleep and she was with him. So I can completely understand why she felt that while she'll be deeply sad after 73 years of marriage, and his children will be sad because he's not around, they'll also be very, very aware that this is the natural process, and it means that there will be no trauma associated with it. In fact, there'll be gratitude. And when you have gratitude associated with death, like I did with my grandma's death, I remember feeling like we were gently letting her go and cradling her into death. I think a lot of us can relate to that good death impact, so that afterwards, yes, you're sad, but it's overwhelming gratitude that you have, and a sense that it was the right time, in the right place, in the right space. And if you were privileged to be around that, that even adds to that sense of gratitude. When it's a traumatic death, and I bring in murder, death of a child, and suicide, these are all what would I consider, and accidents, traumatic deaths, so completely unexpected, completely against their time, and not what nature intended, shall we say. It additionalizes the burden of grief. So when you come to birthdays or Christmases, it stains them. It can't help but do that, because one of the things that I don't think we talk about a lot where suicide is concerned is it completely transforms your family. So you have a experience and an expectation and a schema, an almost psychological stereotype for what you imagine your family is and will play out and be. So when somebody kills themselves, it throws a nuke into that space, and it doesn't just remove the person, it breaks down so many different relationships within that unit. It completely changes each person within it, and then it restructures the way that your family operates, and sometimes it restructures it in a way that isn't how it feels it should be, and is in a way that you miss from the past. So that's why these kind of dates will often provoke a lot more feeling than you'd imagine after a certain amount of years. It's because you're not just grieving the person who took their life or the memories that were meant to occur or the future they should have lived. You're grieving what was once your world that will never be your world again. So I guess how would I manage it? Well, first of all, I'm really at the very beginning of my own experience. So I didn't celebrate Christmas this year, and I didn't celebrate my birthday this year, and I don't think I'm going to celebrate a lot of those things for the next few years, because most of them were about my dad. So I think it's okay if you just want to change the way that you think about these events. Alternately, you could go and do something ritualistic. You could let some balloons off. You could write some poems. You could call all your family members and ask them to make up a funny poem about him. You could do a Zoom night where you all tell stories about the thing that meant most about him. It's up to you. But the most important and integral part is to remember that that grief is really beautiful. It's you and him connected. It's the thing that will always be. It's sacred. So don't be afraid of that thread of grief, because it's what connects you with him. And I always think that's a really beautiful knowledge that I have, that I don't feel like I'm separated from my loved ones. I feel like there are invisible threads that tether me to them, but I can't pull them back. But one day I'll be able to be pulled towards, if that makes sense. Everyone has a different perspective. I know lots of atheists watch this channel, so I have no issue with people who don't believe, but it's just, for me, that personally is something that really helps. So maybe think about that, think about the tether. It's a funny thing when I do that, because I always go near my umbilical cord, but that's kind of what I think the issue is. I kind of feel like you're born connected, and then whilst you sever the physical cord, the cord remains, and it's almost like a connected cord with everybody that you're related to, everybody that you've loved. That's what I see as these invisible threads that grief connects and hopefully will return us to in the end. Hi Emma, I've been having very bad anxiety about issues that I can't control. I'm really sleep deprived as I can't switch off my brain. I haven't been eating properly in weeks due to this. I've never had a good relationship with food, but I'm worried that I'll progress into more serious food issues. Have you any advice for me, please? First of all, I'm really glad that you've noticed that when you feel anxious, it's impacting on your food, and that you also fear that this could become something that's a little bit more serious. And the reason for that is eating disorders are really challenging to treat. You know, if you go on any research paper, that's what you'll find. But actually, eating disorders, when they're early, are not that difficult to treat. It's when we allow ourselves to go down that road, and then the habits become ingrained, and then the other behaviours that become really destructive become really problematic for you physically. So we think about Nikki Graham, the lovely, lovely Nikki Graham, who I knew and was a really lovely human being. You know, she struggled because her eating disorder was so entrenched, so ingrained, that it had been so long-standing that trying to unravel that was obviously far more problematic than it would be for somebody who is brave enough to admit at the very beginning that they're struggling. Please don't think I'm saying that people who have eating disorders are not brave, by the way. I'm saying it takes a lot of courage before your body starts showing everybody that you have a problem to actually acknowledge it. So the first thing I'd do is, if you think that you're starting to resist eating and restrict it, I would like you to go to your doctors. They're not going to wave a magic wand, but they are going to get you on a list for counselling. And again, that list can take 6 to 12 months. So getting on it is really important, particularly if there's something that is a constant theme within your world. Secondly, anxiety is known to do one of two things really where food is concerned. It makes people undereat or overeat. So people respond by trying to sedate the feelings by eating lots of food, or to almost meet the feeling, that nervous dread, by keeping it empty. So it's not uncommon that when people are deeply anxious, they go one or the other. So you're somebody who restricts eating because you don't feel like you actually want to be full, usually because your appetite feels suppressed because of the level of cortisol and adrenaline that's going through your system. So what we need to do is to lower that. We need to get you more relaxed. We need to get you less anxious. So the first thing is, what are those fears? Name them. If that means sitting down and literally writing a list and giving words to the fears, What is it that you're afraid of? So often we don't actually allow ourselves to voice the thoughts that we're having. We don't allow ourselves to just execute the reality of what's causing us this pain. So name them, because once you've named them, then you can get strategic, because there is always a plan that can be worked. And also, when you look at the fears that you've got, you need to pick out the ones that you can control. So there are so many things I would like to have done this last 12 months. There are so many decisions I would have made differently. There are so many things that I have felt really hurt watching and also hurt receiving. But if I then try to control all of those things, all I'll do is destroy my own ability to be of use in this world, because I can't change lockdown. I can't change the investment in mental health. I can't do the things that would make, in my opinion, the right difference to the UK. And if I focus fully on doing that, then I will fail. So what I always do with my work is I have to prioritize the things that actually I can manage. So when you're writing down that list of fears, you need to cross out the ones that you have no power over. And it's just acknowledging, it's not being defeatist, it's acknowledging your power. Well, I have no power to change that, I have no power to change that, but I do have power to change this, this, and this. So with your eating, it might be, I'm afraid of getting weight, putting weight on. So it's about saying, okay, well, I can manage this because I want to be healthy. I want to put all of my energy in being healthy, not thin, not skinny, healthy. So how can I work a plan that's going to encourage that? And then you put energy into that. Or if it's, oh, I don't know what I'm nervous about, I just feel these nerves in my belly, it's okay. Well, we can do some meditation around that, because that's going to reduce those feelings, and it's also going to reduce the levels of cortisol, and it's also going to help you to just find that piece of space. Same with mindful practice. Or it might be that you actually just start thinking about, well, okay, I don't want to over-exercise because I know that I've got an issue with my eating, but I do want to start getting outside, going for a long walk with nature, feeling the sun on my skin, listening to the birds in the trees, and just having a mindful experience of the present moment. Also, when it comes down to eating food, food is fuel. It is nothing else. It's not good and it's not bad. It's just food. And the more you can see it in that very clear context, which is, I need my body to go from A, birth, to B, death, in the best way possible. So you want to keep it in the best shape possible. And the best shape possible is not restricting food. The best shape possible is having a really good understanding of food and knowing what your body needs and deserves. Because when you're refusing to give yourself that nutrition, you're refusing to believe that you have worth. Your body is a mass value. It's a walking miracle. So the more you can kind of conceptualize it that way, the more you can have worthiness within the self to allow yourself to eat. But when you learn about food and you learn about health, it kind of helps you to really work through that. So when I look at my eating disorder when I was a younger person, if you'd have given me a handful of cashew nuts, I literally would have thought you were insane, because cashew nuts would have been high calorie, or Brazil nuts would have been high calorie. Now, as an adult, because I understand food and I understand fuel, I will eat so many nuts every single week. I don't even think about the calorific value, because I know that calories mean nothing. It's the integrity of the nutrition that means everything. So what you eat is often, when we're on an anorexic journey, you're thinking about calories. You're not thinking about content and fuel, and that's the important thing to do where eating disorders are concerned. So definitely go and speak to your doctor, because you do need to get on a waiting list, and it will take time, but you don't want to be in a restrictive cycle without getting some kind of support, okay? That's really, really important. Eating disorders that are dealt with very early on, this is bulimia or beginnings of anorexia or binge eating disorder, they can be managed really effectively. You don't want to go further down that road, because it becomes a harder journey, and know that you've done nothing wrong. Eating disorders have gone through the roof. And another question, where's the best place to get help with eating disorders? The first stop is to speak to your GP. However, there are organisations like Beat which can help. And also, I don't know the name of this particular organisation, but I'll get Pete to put it on. Gemma Oaten, who used to be in Emmerdale, her family and her run an eating disorders programme, which is meant to be fabulous. So look on Gemma Oaten on Twitter, and also Pete will find Gemma Oaten's family's charity. It's all about eating disorders. She herself had very severe anorexia for a long time, and I know that they offer help and support too. So initially, I would go to your GPs just so you get a referral, so that kind of gets started. And secondly, I would also speak to these helplines, because these are people who've been through it. They're people who know exactly what's going on, and they'll be able to give you an empathic ear, great advice, and just remind you that you are not alone. And just a little tip here as well. Sometimes GPs are not the most sympathetic to people with eating disorders initially. And I'll tell you why. Because they're trained in very little areas, but over a lot of stuff. And that's no discredit to any GP at all. I'm saying that they can only know a certain amount about lots of stuff. That's what they've got to do. They've got to know lots and lots of stuff. So we have to forgive them for not really understanding eating disorders. And unless you get a GP with a really big interest in eating disorders, you're potentially going to have somebody who looks at you, and if you don't look anorexic, they won't connect that you're having anorexic-based behaviours. Now, this is why it's really important to go in and say that you are restricting eating and it is becoming more and more of a problem, so that you make it very clear that whilst you are functional, you are on a journey to a destructive path. It's really important to get that across, because what you don't want is to go in and then be made to feel like, well, your BMI looks fine, or just try eating some more, or here's a dietitian. You know, you want more than that, which is a referral to therapy. And you can actually get sent to a dietitian by the GP. And I have often found that the dietitians are really quite helpful when you go and have a talk with them about restrictive eating. So all of those things are what I do. Evening, Emma. My mum has recently been very unwell. She's continued to be unwell, but she's out of hospital. I'm getting her seen by a specialist soon, but as she's been so ill in the last 18 months, she's starting to lose hope and feel that the next infection she gets could kill her. And if I'm honest, this could be the case. But I know it will help if I can keep her positive and give her some hope to not give up. Any advice on keeping her mentally positive would be very much appreciated. Thank you for all the hard work you and Pete do. You are very welcome. So first of all, I don't know what is actually going on for your mum and what kind of infections that she's getting, because it could be something like sepsis, which I know that can reoccur and is very, very serious. I'm not sure what infection she's dealing with. Actually explore whether there are any natural opportunities of maybe more actions is to have a level of control. Personally, again, this is just a subjective opinion. I don't look to the hospital system or medical system to give my power to, if that makes sense. I think it's amazing, and certainly if I was in a car crash and need sewing up, that's where I absolutely want to go, right?